an original paranormal story written by Wicked Serenity Romance. Introduction. The courtyard was quiet. That was the wrong thing. The thing that didn't make sense. The thing Victoria's brain kept snagging on, even as the rest of her was falling apart. A child had just died here, minutes ago, in this exact spot. And the courtyard was quiet. The sun was still coming in at the same angle it always did. The stones were the same color. The air smelled the same. Nothing had changed. Everything had changed. She was on her knees. She didn't remember getting there. Her son was in her arms, small still, warm in a way that was already starting to lie. And she was holding him the way she had held him every single night for 5 months. One hand under his head, the other curled around his body. Close, safe. Except he wasn't safe. He wasn't anything anymore. The sound that came out of her wasn't a scream. It was something underneath screaming, something that had no name. But before that, night. You need to understand something about the man she loved. You need to understand what he was and what he had been doing right under her eyes for a very long time. This is where it starts. Chapter 1. Victoria was 5 years old the first time she felt him. Not saw, not met. Felt. The way you feel a shift in the air before a storm. Quiet, unannounced, impossible to ignore once it was there. She was at the edge of the pack grounds, barefoot in the grass, watching the sun go down, when a boy walked up beside her and stood there, silent, still, like he had always been part of that piece of sky, and she was only now noticing him. He was 6, dark-eyed, quiet in a way that wasn't shyness. It was something older than that, something watchful. He looked at the horizon for a long time without speaking. Then, "It's beautiful, isn't it?" She nodded. That was all it was. A boy and a girl and a sunset in a sentence. But something clicked inside her chest that afternoon. Deep and final and real. The kind of thing you don't understand when you're 5. You only feel it. A lock turning. A door opening into a room you didn't know was there. His name was Bitgaram. And from that day forward, he was everywhere. They grew up side by side the way some children do. Not always together, but always aware. Always in orbit. Victoria would be training in the yard and feel him watching from the ridge before she looked up and confirmed it. Bitgaram would be in a meeting with the elders and hear her laugh from somewhere in the den, and his head would turn, just slightly, before he caught himself. The pack noticed. Of course they did. Packs notice everything. The elders called it what it was. The mate bond, forming early, pulling them toward each other, with a gravity neither of them had chosen. It was rare. It was old magic, and it meant something permanent. Bitgaram's father was the Alpha, a man built from silence and iron, who governed the Thornwood pack with the kind of authority that didn't need to announce itself. He was feared, not hated. Feared. There is a difference. He was the kind of leader people followed, not because they wanted to, but because they understood instinctively that the alternative was worse. Bitgaram grew up in his shadow, learned its shape, learned what it cost to carry. By the time he was a teenager, he moved through the pack the way his father did. Measured, composed, every word chosen. People trusted him before he gave them reason to. That was the kind of presence he had. Victoria grew up different. Her mother was a healer. Gentle hands, gentle voice, the kind of woman who could hold a dying man and make him feel less alone. Her father was a warrior. Broad, blunt, loved his daughter like something he would burn the world to protect. Victoria got something from both of them: her mother's warmth, her father's stubbornness, and something else too. Something neither of them could explain. An openness, a trust so total, it was almost naive. Her mother warned her about it sometimes, softly, the way you warn a child not to lean too far over a ledge. But Victoria never felt like she was near an edge. Not then. Bitgaram's father died when Bitgaram was 22. A sickness. Fast and brutal. The kind that doesn't give you time to prepare. It ate through the old alpha in weeks, and the healers couldn't slow it. And one morning, the man who had held the pack together for 30 years simply didn't open his eyes. The pack grieved. Quietly. The way Thornwood did everything. Without spectacle, without weakness on display. And Bitgaram stepped forward. No one challenged it. No one even considered it. They had watched him grow up. They had seen what he was. When the elders placed the Alpha's mark on his chest, a ritual older than the pack itself, older than the land the den was built on, his hand didn't shake. He became Alpha the way a river finds its bed, like it was always going to happen, like the ground had been shaped for it long before the water arrived. The mating ceremony was held 3 months later. It was tradition. When an Alpha took the throne, the bond, if there was one, had to be formally sealed. Not for the gods, not for the magic, for the pack. So that everyone knew, so that the Luna was declared, and the line was drawn, and the order of things was made clear. They gathered under the stars, the whole pack, every den, every elder. Torches burned along the perimeter of the great circle. The air was cold. Victoria's hands were shaking, not from fear, from something else, something bigger. Bitgaram stood across from her. The firelight moved across his face. He looked at her the way he had been looking at her for years, the same way he had looked at that sunset when they were children, like it was the only thing worth seeing. The elders spoke the old words. Victoria didn't hear most of them. She was watching Bitgaram's face. And then it happened. The bond settled into her chest, not gently. It wasn't gentle. It was a weight, a presence, something ancient and enormous sliding into place inside her, like a key she'd been, carrying her whole life, finally finding the lock it was meant for. It burned, briefly, then it warmed. And for one perfect, suspended moment, everything in Victoria's world made sense. The first year of marriage was everything she had dreamed it would be. They moved into the Alpha's chambers together, a sprawling suite of stone and dark wood on the highest floor of the pack house, with windows that looked out over the den in every direction. Victoria learned the rhythm of it, the way the light moved through the rooms in the morning, the way the pack came and went below, the sounds of daily life rising up through the floors like a heartbeat. She learned the rhythm of Bitgaram, too. He was not an easy man to know. Not cruel. Not then. Just private. Contained. He kept parts of himself behind doors that didn't have handles on the outside, and Victoria understood, early on, that pushing those doors wouldn't work. So, she didn't push. She waited. She was patient. And sometimes, not often, but sometimes, he would open one of them on his own and let her see something underneath the composure that made her chest ache. A laugh, a quiet confession, the way he would reach for her hand in the dark, in the middle of the night, without saying why. She loved him for those moments. She loved him for all of it. They were married. They were bonded. They were building something together. A life, a den, a future that stretched out in front of them like open road. And for a while, that was enough. The first time the sickness came, Victoria didn't recognize it for what it was. It was subtle, a tiredness that sat in her bones after a long day. Heavier than it should have been, stickier, the kind that sleep didn't fix. She woke one morning feeling like something had been slowly drained out of her while she slept. Not a lot, just enough to notice. She mentioned it to Bitgaram over breakfast. Casually, the way you mentioned the weather. He looked up from his meal, nodded once. You should rest, he said. So she rested. And by the next day, the feeling was gone. And she forgot about it. That was how it started. Not with a crash, not with something dramatic or obvious or impossible to ignore. It started with something small, something easy to explain away, something you wouldn't think twice about, unless you knew what it really was. Chapter 2. It came back a month later, heavier this time, not just tiredness, a pressure in her chest, dull and persistent, like something sitting on top of her sternum that she couldn't see and couldn't move. It lasted 2 days. Then it faded, and Victoria told herself it was nothing. A bad season. The stress of learning her new role, the body adjusting to the weight of the bond. She had heard the older Luna women talk about it, how the bond took time to settle, how it changed you, quietly, in ways you couldn't always name. So she accepted it. She was patient with herself. She was patient with the bond. She didn't know the bond was trying to tell her something. By the 4th month of marriage, Silas began coming to see her. He was the pack physician. Old, steady, gray at the temples, with the kind of hands that had seen everything and judged nothing. He had been serving Thornwood for longer than Victoria had been alive. The elders trusted him. The warriors trusted him. Everyone did. He came quietly. No announcement, no fuss. He simply appeared one afternoon, sat down across from Victoria in the sitting room and said, I hear you haven't been feeling well. Victoria blinked. She hadn't told anyone. Not really. She had mentioned the tiredness to Bitgaram once, and that was it. Silas smiled. It was a small smile. Knowing. Word travels, he said, especially when it concerns the Luna. He examined her that day, took her pulse, checked the meridians along her neck and wrists, points that carried signals the body sent when something was off balance, deep down, in places you couldn't see. He was thorough, careful. His face gave nothing away. When he finished, he sat back. The bond is still settling, he said. It can take time, especially in a bond as strong as yours. Victoria nodded. It made sense. It matched what she had already been telling herself. I'll check on you again in a few weeks, Silas said. He did. He came back. And back again. And every time, the examination was the same. Every time, the answer was the same. The bond is settling. Give it time. Victoria gave it time. The episodes got worse. Not every day. Not even every week. But they came back. Again and again. And each time they lasted a little longer and hit a little harder. There were afternoons when the pressure in her chest was so heavy she couldn't breathe properly. Shallow, careful breaths, like the air itself had thickened. There were mornings when she woke feeling hollowed out, like something had been scooped from the inside of her overnight, and no amount of eating or sleeping or sitting in the sun could fill it back up. She started canceling things. Small things at first. A walk with one of the elder women, an afternoon in the garden. Then bigger things. Pack meetings, duty rounds. The work that a Luna was supposed to do. The quiet governance, that kept the den running. She fell behind on it, and then further behind, and the gap between what she should have been doing and what she could actually manage grew wider every week. No one said anything, not directly, but she felt it. The way people looked at her when they thought she wasn't watching. The way conversations sometimes stopped when she entered a room. She told herself it was concern. That was the kindest explanation. And she chose the kindest explanation because she had no reason, not yet, to choose a darker one. Bidgaram was there through all of it. That was the thing that kept her grounded, the thing that kept her from spiraling into real fear. Because every time the sickness hit, every time the heaviness came back and settled into her bones like something with roots, he was beside her. He sat with her on the bad afternoons, brought her water, spoke to her in that low, even voice of his, the one that never wavered, never cracked, the one that made you believe everything was going to be fine, even when it wasn't. He held her hand. Sometimes, he said, nothing at all, just sat there, present, solid, the way a wall is solid, something you can lean against without it giving way. And Victoria would close her eyes and feel the bond humming between them, warm, steady, alive, and think, he's here. He's not going anywhere. Whatever this is, I'm not facing it alone. She believed that, completely, without question. She had no reason not to. 3 years passed, 3 years of the sickness coming and going like a tide she couldn't predict. 3 years of Silas visiting, examining, nodding, and saying the same careful things he always said. 3 years of Bitgaram beside her, attentive, steady, the picture of a devoted mate. 3 years of trying to have a child and failing. That was the part that hurt the most, not the sickness itself. She had learned to live around it, the way you learn to walk around a piece of furniture in the dark. The child was the wound that wouldn't close. They wanted one. The pack wanted one. The bond wanted one. She could feel it sometimes, a pull deep in her body, a readiness that her body couldn't seem to follow through on. Every time she thought it might happen, the sickness would come back. Harder, longer, and the hope would dissolve, quietly, like salt in water. Silas never explained why. He never connected the two things, the sickness and the inability to conceive. Or, if he did, he never said so out loud. Victoria didn't think to ask. She trusted him. She trusted Bidgaram. She trusted the bond. She trusted everything. And none of it, not one thing, was what it appeared to be. Chapter 3. The pain of not having a child was not loud. It wasn't the kind of grief that announced itself. No crying, no collapsing, no dramatic moment where the weight of it became too much. It was quieter than that, smaller. It lived in the spaces between things, in the way Victoria's eyes would drift to the other women's children without meaning to, in the way she would touch her own stomach sometimes, absently, in the middle of the night, and feel nothing there but skin and bone and the dull, familiar ache of the sickness. 3 years. 3 years of wanting something her body wouldn't give her. 3 years of hoping, and then not hoping, and then hoping again, and each cycle wearing something down inside her that she couldn't name. She didn't talk about it, not to Bitgaram, not to Silas, not to anyone. Some pains you carry alone, not because you have to, because no one knows how to hold them for you. It was spring when everything changed. She woke before dawn, the way she often did now, her body on a rhythm of its own that had nothing to do with the sun. But this morning was different. The heaviness wasn't there. Not dulled, not quieter than usual. Gone. She lay very still, one hand resting on her stomach without thinking, and listened. The bond was humming, the way it always did, that low, constant vibration she had learned to tune out, the way you tune out the sound of wind. But underneath it, underneath everything, there was something else, something new, small, quiet, barely a whisper of a thing, but unmistakable once she felt it, like a second heartbeat sitting inside her own. Victoria didn't move for a long time. She went to Silas alone, not Begarum, not Lyra, her best friend, not anyone. She needed to know for herself first, needed to hold the truth in her own hands before she let anyone else near it. This was hers. If it was real, if it was what she thought it was hers first. Silas received her in his workroom, a small, warm space near the back of the pack house that smelled of dried herbs and old wood. He didn't ask why she had come. He looked at her face, and something in his expression shifted. Not surprise, exactly. Something closer to recognition. He examined her the way he always did, hands on the meridians, pulse, temperature. The quiet, methodical ritual she had sat through dozens of times over the past 3 years. But this time was different. She felt it in the way his hands slowed, in the way his breathing changed, just slightly, just enough. He wasn't frowning. For the first time in 3 years of visits, Silas wasn't frowning. He sat back, his hands folded in his lap, and the mask he wore, the one she had seen 100 times, careful, measured, giving nothing away, dropped. He smiled. It was small, warm, the kind of smile that comes from somewhere real. "You are with child, my Luna." The words landed in her chest like sunlight through a crack in stone. She pressed both hands to her mouth. Her eyes burned, not from sadness, not from the quiet grief she had carried for so long it had become part of her bones, from something else entirely. Relief. So deep and so sudden it stole her breath. She told Begarum that evening. The fire was low in their chamber. The last of the daylight was coming through the high windows in thin, amber lines. Victoria was sitting on the edge of the bed when he walked in, still dressed from whatever he had been doing all day, his coat still smelling of cold air and something else she didn't think to notice. She turned to him. Her hands were still shaking, slightly, from the residual shock of it, the newness of it. "I'm carrying your child," she said. It was quiet, simple, the most important sentence she had ever spoken, and she said it the way you say something so enormous, it doesn't fit inside normal words. Begarum went still. He looked at her. For a moment, just a moment, something flickered across his face that Victoria couldn't read. Fast, gone before she could catch it. Then he crossed the room. 3 steps. He took her face in both hands and kissed her. Firm, deep. The kind of kiss that was less about tenderness and more about something else. Ownership, maybe. Certainty. The way a man might grip something he was afraid of losing. When he pulled back, his eyes were bright. "Mine," he said. Victoria smiled. She heard it as love. It was not love, but she didn't know that yet. The pack found out by morning. Word in Thornwood moved the way water moves through cracks. Fast, silent, inevitable. By the time Victoria had dressed and come down to the great hall, the news was already everywhere. The Luna was with child, the Alpha's heir. The reaction was not subtle. The elders gathered that same day, not for a formal ceremony, but for a blessing, an informal one. They sat in the great circle and spoke words over Victoria that were older than the pack itself. older than the den, older than the land the walls were built on. Words meant to protect, to welcome, to say, "We see this, we honor it." The warriors celebrated. The women brought gifts, small handmade things carved from bone and wood and woven from thread, sachets of dried herbs that were supposed to bring health and good fortune to the unborn. Victoria received them all with open hands and a warmth in her chest that had nothing to do with the bond and everything to do with feeling, for the first time in a very long while, like she belonged somewhere. For the first time in 3 years, the pack felt whole. The pregnancy was not easy. Her body had been carrying damage for years. Quiet, invisible damage that Silas had never explained and Victoria had never thought to question. Now that damage made itself known. The sickness came back. Not the old heaviness, exactly, but something tangled up with it. Nausea. Exhaustion so deep, it felt structural, like something in her foundation was cracking. There were nights when she couldn't eat, couldn't sleep, could barely sit up without the room tilting sideways. But she bore it. She bore it the way she bore everything, without complaint, without drama, with a stubbornness that was so deeply part of her, it had no name. Because something was growing inside her, something that was hers in a way nothing else had ever been. And no amount of pain was going to make her let it go. Bitgarm was attentive during those months, present, careful with her. He brought her things she needed before she asked. He sat beside her on the bad nights and held her hand and spoke in that low, steady voice that never wavered. He was doing what a good mate does. He was playing the part. Victoria didn't know it was a part. She felt his hand around hers and the bond humming warm between them, and she thought, "We are going to be parents. We are going to build this together." She believed it. She wanted so badly to believe it that she didn't notice the things that didn't fit. Chapter 4. The labor started at midnight, not gradually, not with a slow, building rhythm that the midwives described. It started all at once, a clench so deep and so violent that Victoria's body folded in on itself before her mind caught up. She gasped. Her hands grabbed the edge of the bed hard enough to whiten her knuckles. Something inside her had opened, and it was not going to close again until this was done. Bitgarm was awake before she made a sound. She didn't know how. Maybe the bond, the way it carried signals between them, whether she meant to send them or not. Maybe something else. But he was there, beside her, his hand finding hers in the dark with a certainty that surprised her. "Silas," he said. One word. Calm, already moving. Within minutes, the chamber was full. Midwives, healers, Silas himself, his face set in that focused expression Victoria had only seen once before, years ago, when a warrior had come in from a hunt with half his chest torn open. The expression of a man who understood exactly how close the edge was. What followed was the longest night of Victoria's life. The pain was a living thing. It moved through her in waves, enormous, crushing, the kind that made thought impossible. Between the waves there was breath, and nothing else. No room for fear, no room for anything, except the next inhale and the next exhale, and the knowledge that this was happening and there was no stopping it. The midwives moved around her with the efficiency of people who had done this 100 times. Their hands were sure. Their voices were low and even. A constant, grounding murmur beneath the chaos of her body's rebellion. One of them held her hand. Another pressed a cool cloth to her forehead. Another was doing things Victoria couldn't see and didn't want to. Silas was close. Closer than he needed to be. His hands moved constantly, checking, adjusting, reading the signals her body was sending in a language only he understood. His jaw was tight. The muscle along it jumped once when a particularly brutal wave hit and Victoria's back arched off the bed. He said something to the midwife beside him. Low, urgent. Words Victoria couldn't catch over the sound of her own breathing. She would remember that later. The urgency in his voice. The way he didn't look at her when he said it. She would wonder much later what he knew. There was a moment, somewhere in the deepest, blackest part of the night, when Victoria felt herself slipping. Not into sleep, into something colder, emptier. A pulling sensation, like the ground was giving way underneath her, like something was gently, firmly, drawing her away from the surface of the world. The bond flickered in her chest, stuttered, like a flame running out of air. The midwives' voices went distant. The pain, paradoxically, began to fade, not because it was easing, but because she was moving away from it, away from everything. She was dying. She knew it, in the way the body knows things before the mind catches up. She was dying, and it was quiet, and it wasn't as frightening as she had imagined. Then Bitgaram was there. His face filled her vision. Close. So close she could see every detail of it. The lines around his eyes, the scar on his jaw from a childhood fall she remembered, the way the firelight moved across his skin, and in his eyes, something she had never seen. Not composure, not control, not the steady, unshakable calm of the alpha. Fear. Real fear. The kind that strips everything else away. The kind that means, I cannot lose this. Stay, he said. One word, barely there. A whisper pushed through teeth that were clenched so hard the tendons in his neck stood out. Victoria looked at him. And something in her, something that had been sliding toward the dark, toward the quiet, toward the place where the pain couldn't reach, stopped and turned and came back. She stayed. The baby came at dawn. The first gray light was just beginning to touch the windows when the last wave hit. The final, enormous, undeniable one. And Victoria's body did the thing it had been trying to do all night. She pushed. She screamed. She pushed again. And then there was a cry. Small, furious, outraged at being dragged into a cold and loud and unfamiliar world. The sound of it cut through the chamber like a blade. Sharp, clean, impossible to ignore. The midwife lifted him and placed him on Victoria's chest. Warm, wet, slippery with the mess of birth. His eyes were screwed shut. His fists were clenched. His mouth was open and he was screaming. And he was the most beautiful thing Victoria had ever seen in her life. She looked down at him and something broke open inside her. Not painfully, the way a seed breaks open to let something grow. Bitgaram's hand came to rest on the back of the baby's head. Large, calloused, the hand of a man who fought and ruled and carried things heavier than most people could imagine. And it touched his son's head with a gentleness that made Victoria's throat close. Ours, Bitgaram said. His voice was rough, stripped of its usual composure. Something underneath it, something that might have been wonder, or might have been something else entirely, leaked through. Victoria nodded. She couldn't speak, didn't need to. They stayed like that for a long time, the three of them, the fire burning low, the morning light growing stronger in the windows, the baby quieting, slowly, against his mother's chest, his screaming fading into smaller sounds, hiccups, whimpers, the tiny bewildered noises of a creature learning to exist. They named him Alec. It was Bitgaram's suggestion. The name of the tree that grew at the border between the living world and the spirit world. The tree that was said to protect those who walked near it. A guardian's name. A name for something precious. Victoria loved it immediately. The pack celebrated for 3 days. It was the biggest celebration Thornwood had seen in years. Drums beating through the night, fires burning in every den, food and drink and laughter that echoed off the stone walls and carried out into the dark. The elders blessed the child. The warriors drank toasts. The women sang the old songs. The ones about new life, about beginnings, about the gods watching over the smallest and most fragile things. Victoria sat in the great hall on the second night, Alec against her chest, and listened to the music and the voices and the warmth of it all, and felt something she hadn't felt in a very long time. She felt whole. The heaviness in her bones was gone, completely gone. For the first time in 3 years, her body felt like it belonged to her again. She breathed in, deep, full, easy, and the air went all the way down, and nothing in her chest pushed back. She thought, it's over. Whatever was wrong with me, it's finally over. She pressed her lips to the top of Alec's head and closed her eyes. For now, for this one small and burning moment. She was right. Chapter 5. Motherhood was loud. That was the first thing Victoria learned, that it was nothing like the quiet, serene thing the songs described. It was chaos. Beautiful, relentless, consuming chaos. Alec woke at hours that had no logic to them. He fed like he was starving. He screamed with a force that seemed physically impossible for something so small. A sound that filled the chamber and vibrated in the stone walls and followed Victoria into her dreams. She loved it. All of it. Even the parts that exhausted her, to the point where her hands shook. She loved the weight of him in her arms, the way his body curled against hers like he was trying to crawl back inside her. The smell of him, milk and warmth and something underneath both of those things that was just him, just Alec, something that belonged only to him and to her. She loved the way he would turn his head toward her voice, the way his dark eyes, Bidgaram's eyes, everyone said, would find her face in a room and hold it like she was the only fixed point in a world that was spinning too fast. 5 months. 5 months of this new, consuming, all rewriting love. And in all of it, not once did the sickness come back. Not once. It was as though Alec's arrival had sealed something. Closed a door that had been open for 3 years. The heaviness was gone. The hollowed out feeling, the dull pressure in her chest, the wrongness that hummed underneath everything. All of it. Gone. Like it had never been there. Victoria noticed. Of course she did. She noticed the way you notice the absence of pain after a long illness, with a quiet, stunned gratitude that borders on disbelief. She didn't question it. She didn't go to Silas and ask why. She didn't pull the thread and see where it led. She was happy. For the first time in 3 years, she was genuinely, completely happy. And she was not going to ruin it by looking too closely at the reasons. Maren, the new servant, came within the first week. She was young, mid-20s maybe, with a quiet competence that Victoria noticed immediately. Not quietness that came from shyness or uncertainty. The kind that came from someone who had learned, early, that the best way to be useful was to be invisible until you were needed. She helped with Alec when Victoria needed to sleep, which was often. The first weeks after birth were brutal in their own way. Not painful, but draining. Exhaustion that went bone deep and didn't lift, no matter how long you closed your eyes. Marin would take Alec from Victoria's arms without being asked, gently, carefully, the way you take something irreplaceable from someone who needs to let it go but doesn't want to. She would hold him against her chest and move through the chamber in slow, quiet circles, and Alec would quiet, and Victoria would sleep. It was a simple arrangement, a normal practice that happened in every den, in every pack. A servant assigned to help the Luna. Nothing unusual, but Victoria trusted her. Not deeply, not the way she trusted the people who had known her for years, but in the way you trust someone whose hands are steady and whose eyes are kind and who has, again and again, shown you that they can be relied upon. She left Alec with Marin without fear. That mattered. Later, it would matter enormously. Lyra was there, every day. She had been Victoria's closest friend since childhood. Long before the bond, long before the title, long before any of the weight that came with being the Luna of Thornwood. They had grown up together, played together, shared secrets that children share. Small, precious, the currency of closeness. And somewhere along the way, without either of them naming it or marking it or making it into something formal, they had become best friends who didn't need to explain themselves to each other. Lyra just knew. She always had. She came every afternoon, sometimes in the morning too, and sat with Victoria in the chamber with the windows that overlooked the den. She held Alec sometimes, settling him on her knee, making faces at him that were so ridiculous. They made Victoria laugh out loud. Laughter that came from somewhere deep and unguarded. Victoria hadn't laughed like that in months, maybe years. "He's got your stubbornness," Lyra said one afternoon, grinning, as Alec gripped her finger with a force that surprised them both. "Poor thing." Victoria smiled. It was easy with Lyra. It had always been easy. There was a warmth between them. Warmth built over years of shared history, of knowing someone well enough to see the things they didn't say. Lyra saw Victoria, really saw her. And Victoria, in the quiet, consuming fog of new motherhood, leaned on that more than she would have admitted out loud. Lyra was her anchor, her safe place. The one person in the world who made her feel completely, entirely herself. She didn't know, couldn't know, how much that trust was going to cost her. "You look better," Lyra said one afternoon, about 3 months in. She was sitting cross-legged on the floor, Alec in her lap, watching Victoria with that particular expression she wore when she was assessing something carefully. Victoria knew the look. It meant Lyra was about to say something honest. "The color's back," Lyra continued. "The shadows under your eyes, they're fading." Victoria looked at her own hands, turned them in the light coming through the window. Lyra was right. The gray pallor that had clung to her skin for 3 years, the one that sleep couldn't fix and tinctures couldn't touch, was lifting. She looked healthy. She felt healthy. More than healthy. She felt alive in a way she hadn't felt since before the sickness started. "Maybe it's him," Victoria said quietly, nodding toward Alec. "Maybe he was what I needed all along." Lyra smiled. It was a warm smile, genuine. "You've always been stronger than you know," she said. Victoria held on to those words. They stayed, with her for the rest of the day. a small, bright thread of comfort woven into the fabric of her happiness. She didn't know that the woman who said them was lying about everything else. By the 5th month, the restlessness set in. It came quietly. Not the old restlessness, the heavy, sick, desperate kind that meant something was wrong inside her. This was lighter, cleaner, a pull, gentle but persistent, back toward the world she had stepped away from. The pack, the duties, the quiet, necessary work of governance that the Luna was supposed to carry. She had been indoors for 5 months. The pack had been patient, more than patient. They understood. The Luna had nearly died giving birth. No one expected her back before she was ready. But she was ready. She could feel it. A readiness in her body, in her mind, a wanting to be useful again, to be part of something bigger than the 4 walls of her chamber. She told Bitgarum one evening. He was sitting by the fire, reading something. A report of some kind. Official business he handled in the evenings, after the advisors had gone. He looked up when she spoke. His expression was neutral, attentive in the way it always was when she was talking to him. Focused, present, giving her his full attention. "I want to go back to my duties," she said. "The pack needs me." Bitgarum nodded. Once, smooth and easy, like the decision had already been made before she asked. "Go," he said. "They do need you." He looked back down at his report. That was it. No hesitation. No warmth. No. "I'll miss you." Or, "Are you sure you're ready?" Or any of the small human things that a husband might say when his wife told him she was stepping back into the world after months of recovery. Just go. Victoria didn't notice the absence. She was too relieved to be moving forward again, too grateful to be feeling like herself. She didn't notice that his eyes had already returned to the page before she finished walking out of the room. The morning she left, she stood over Alec's cradle for a long time. He was asleep. The deep, total sleep of infants, where the whole body goes slack and the breathing slows and the face softens into something so peaceful, it almost looks like something other than a living child. She watched the rise and fall of his chest, counted his breaths without meaning to. 3, 4, 5. She reached down and laid her hand against his cheek, warm, soft, the skin of him impossibly fine, like something made of light. "I'll be back before you know it," she whispered. She didn't need to whisper. He was asleep. He couldn't hear her, but the words mattered anyway. They were a promise, a small quiet one, made in an empty room, to someone who would never remember it. Mourned was by the door, hands clasped in front of her, waiting. Victoria caught her eye and held it for a moment. A silent exchange that happens between people who have built a small, wordless trust. "I am leaving my son with you. I am trusting you with the most important thing in the world." And Marian's nod said, "I understand. I will not fail you." Victoria turned and walked out into the morning. The sun was coming up. The air was clean and cold and smelled like pine and wet stone. The pack house was waking around her. Sounds of movement, of life, of the ordinary machinery of the den turning over into a new day. Everything was exactly as it should have been. But she had no idea. Chapter 6. The great hall was warm. Victoria sat at the long oak table near the front, the Luna's seat, the one that faced the room and gave a clear line of sight to the doors. She had missed this. More than she expected. The weight of the chair beneath her, the papers spread in front of her, the low hum of voices and business, and the smell of wood smoke from the fire at the far end. She was listening to an elder, an old woman named Gret, with a voice like gravel and a mind sharper than most half her age, explain a border dispute. Two families, Eastern Ridge, grazing land, a disagreement that was small on its own, but could fester into something worse if no one paid attention. Victoria was paying attention. She was good at this. The quiet, careful work of listening and weighing and deciding. It was part of who she was, part of why she was Luna. She was in the middle of a question when it happened. The bond hit her like a fist, not the usual hum, not the quiet, constant vibration she had learned to live with. This was a jerk. Sudden, violent, a sharp yank in the dead center of her chest that knocked the breath out of her so completely she couldn't speak. She went rigid. Her hand gripped the edge of the table. Her vision blurred just for a second. The way it does when something physical strikes you, hard enough to rattle everything loose. Something was wrong. Not a feeling, not an instinct, a signal. The bond was sending her a signal, and it was the loudest thing she had ever felt. And it was saying, something has broken. Something has broken, and it cannot be fixed. She looked up. The door to the hall opened. A guard walked in. Young, maybe 20, maybe younger. His face was the color of ash. His armor was streaked with something dark, something that had dried in places and was still wet in others, and Victoria's eyes went to it before her mind could process what it was. Blood. The hall had gone silent. Not gradually, all at once. The way a room goes silent when something enters it, that changes the shape of everything. Every voice stopped. Every movement stopped. The only sound was the fire, crackling at the far end of the room, indifferent to what was about to happen. The guard opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again. My Luna. His voice was barely there, stripped thin by whatever he had seen. There was an incident with the young prince. Victoria didn't move. She didn't breathe. Something inside her, something deep and instinctive and older than thought, had already understood. The bond had told her. The signal in her chest had told her. Her body knew before her mind did, the way bodies always do when the thing they're about to learn is too large to arrive gently. What kind of incident? She said. Her voice came out flat, empty, like it belonged to someone else. The guard couldn't look at her. His eyes were fixed on a point, somewhere past her shoulder, somewhere that wasn't her face, because her face was the one thing in the room he couldn't bear to see. The prince is dead, my Luna. The words fell into the silence like stones into water. A wild animal. It breached the grounds through the eastern gate. The guards, we tried. We got there as fast. His voice cracked. He stopped. Swallowed. Couldn't finish. He didn't need to. Victoria stood up. She didn't remember deciding to. One moment she was sitting, and the next she was on her feet, and the chair was behind her, and her hands were at her sides, and she was walking. She didn't feel the floor beneath her, didn't feel the air moving past her as she crossed the hall. The people in the room parted, silently, instinctively, the way animals part around something they sense is beyond their reach. Some of them were crying. She saw their faces as she passed, mouths open, eyes red, hands pressed to chests, and registered them the way you register scenery from a moving window. She was not there. Not really. Some part of her had already left the room, had already left the building, was already in the courtyard where her son was lying on a blanket on the cold stone. The rest of her was simply following. The corridors were long. She walked through them and didn't see them. The sounds of the pack house, footsteps, voices, the distant clatter of kitchens and work and life continuing, came to her as though from underwater, muffled, distant, belonging to a world she was no longer part of. Someone was crying somewhere ahead of her. She passed them without turning her head. A servant pressed himself against the wall as she went by. She didn't see him. The courtyard doors were open. She didn't remember who had opened them. Maybe they had always been open. Maybe it didn't matter. She walked through them. The light was beautiful. That was the first thing. The late afternoon sun coming in at an angle across the stone. Long, golden, a light that softened everything it touched. She knew this light. She had crossed this courtyard 1,000 times, at 1,000 different hours, and she knew the way it moved here. She knew the sound the fountain made. She knew the smell of the air. Cold stone and pine and something green from the gardens on the other side of the wall. She knew this place. And then her eyes found him, and she knew nothing at all. They had laid him on a blanket, white linen, the good kind that was kept for ceremonies and important occasions. Someone had thought to use the good blanket. Someone had thought, in the middle of all of this, about making it look right, about dignity. The blanket was dark now, stained in places that spread outward from the center, like something blooming. Someone had tried to clean him. His face was mostly clean, his hands wiped, the worst of it smoothed away. But there was still blood, in his hair, along the line of his jaw, on the edge of the blanket where it curled away from his body in a shape that was too small, impossibly small. His eyes were closed. His chest was not moving. Victoria walked toward him. She walked slowly. Not because her legs were failing. They weren't. Because something in her understood, in a way that was deeper than thought, that this was the last moment before everything changed. The last breath before the air turned to something else. The last step on solid ground before the ground gave way. She knelt. She reached down, one hand beneath his head, the way she had held him since the first night, the other curled around his body, the way she had held him every single time. The weight of him was so familiar. It was like lifting a part of herself. She knew exactly how heavy he was. She knew the way his body fit against hers. She lifted him into her arms. He was still warm. She pressed her face into the top of his head and breathed him in. That smell. His smell. The one that was only his. The one she had memorized without trying, without thinking, without knowing she was doing it. The one that meant safe, and hers, and alive. It was still there. Underneath everything else, underneath the blood and the cold and the wrongness of it all. It was still there. And then the sound came out of her. Not a scream, not crying. Something underneath both of those things. Something that had been sitting in the deepest part of her for years. In the sickness, in the silence, and had finally been given permission to come out. It tore through the courtyard and into the air, and it didn't stop. The bond flickered, stuttered, went dim, like a lamp running out of oil. She didn't feel it. She couldn't feel anything except her son in her arms and the warmth that was already fading from his skin. Bitgarum arrived minutes later. She heard him before she saw him. His footsteps, heavy, unhurried, crossing the stone with the same measured pace he used everywhere. She knew the sound of his walk the way she knew the sound of his voice. It was part of the landscape of her life. It had been for years. She didn't look up. He stopped a few feet from where she knelt. She felt the shift in the air, the way the space changed when he was in it, the way it always did. The bond acknowledged him, faintly, even now, even in this. He said nothing. He didn't kneel beside her. He didn't reach for her. He didn't touch his son. He didn't touch the blanket, or the blood, or any of the evidence of what had happened here. He stood, hands at his sides, and he looked at the two of them on the ground. Victoria didn't see his face. But if she had lifted her head just once and turned it toward the man she had loved since she was 5 years old, she would have seen something that didn't fit. Something that didn't belong in that moment, in that place, in the face of a father who had just lost his son. His face was still. Not grief, not shock, not the fear she had seen on the night of the birth. That raw, unguarded terror of losing something irreplaceable. Just stillness, calm, controlled, the face of a man who was not surprised. Lyra found her later. How much time had passed, Victoria didn't know. The sun had moved. The golden light was gone now, replaced by something thinner, cooler, the color draining out of the sky the way it did at dusk. Someone had wrapped a blanket around Victoria's shoulders. Someone had, gently, carefully, taken Alec from her arms. She had let them. She didn't remember letting them. Lyra's voice was close, right beside her ear, soft, urgent, saying things, words, sentences, something that was meant to comfort. But the words didn't land. They bounced off something inside Victoria that had gone hard and smooth, like glass that had been heated and cooled too fast. Nothing could get through it. But she felt Lyra's arms around her, felt the warmth of her, the solidity of her, the presence of someone who had been beside her for most of her life. Victoria leaned into it. She let herself be held. And somewhere else in the pack house, in the great hall behind closed doors, the Alpha was already sitting with his advisors, already listening to the guard's account, already hearing the words, wild animal, Eastern Gate, the servant, already deciding what the story would be. Victoria didn't know that. She was on the floor of the courtyard with her best friend's arms around her, and her son was dead. And the man who was supposed to love her was in another room, already shaping the version of tonight that everyone else would believe. The silence between them was wider than she knew. That was the night everything she had built, the trust, the love, the belief that she was safe, ended, and the night everything that came after began. Chapter 7. A month passed. Victoria didn't count the days. She didn't mark them. Time had stopped meaning anything the moment she lifted Alec's body off that blanket. What came after was just a string of moments, waking, not sleeping, staring at walls, forgetting to eat until someone put food in front of her, and then forgetting to eat it anyway. Grief was not what she expected. She expected crying, screaming, the kind of breakdown that people talked about in whispers, the kind that was large and visible and impossible to ignore. What she got instead was numbness, a blank, hollow space where feeling used to be. She moved through the days like a ghost in her own body, present but not there, alive but not living. The chamber felt too big now, too quiet. She couldn't go near the cradle. Someone, Maren probably, had removed it the first week. Victoria had come back from somewhere, she didn't remember where, and the cradle was gone. just gone, like it had never been there. She was grateful for that, and she hated herself for being grateful. Bitgarum changed, not all at once, not dramatically, but the shift was there, undeniable, like a current underneath still water. At first, he was present, attentive even. He sat with her in the evenings, spoke to her in that same low, steady voice he always used. He held her hand when she couldn't sleep. He made sure she ate. From the outside, it looked like a man taking care of his grieving mate. But something was off. The warmth wasn't there. The softness he had shown during the pregnancy, during the birth, that brief, flickering thing she had mistaken for tenderness, was gone. What was left was performance, duty, the motions of care without the care itself. And then, slowly, the performance stopped. You left him. 3 words, almost conversational. Bitgarum said them one evening as they sat by the fire 2 weeks after the funeral. Victoria had been staring into the flames, not thinking, just existing in the static between one moment and the next. She turned her head, looked at him. What? You left him, Bitgarum repeated. His voice was still calm, still measured. But there was something underneath it now, something sharp. You went to the hall. You left him with the servant. If you had stayed, he didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. Victoria felt the words land in her chest like stones, heavy, cold, a weight that doesn't leave once it settles. I trusted her, Victoria said. Her voice was barely there. Marin, I trusted. You're his mother. Bitgarum's eyes were on the fire, not on her. You should have been there. The silence that followed was enormous. Victoria didn't argue. She didn't defend herself. Because some part of her, some small, vicious part that had been whispering in the back of her mind since the moment she saw Alex's body, agreed with him. She had left. She had walked out of that room and left her son with someone else. And now, he was dead. The logic didn't hold. She knew that, somewhere, underneath the grief. She knew it wasn't her fault, that a mother was allowed to leave her child in capable hands for a few hours without the world ending. But knowing something and feeling it are not the same thing. The pack noticed. Of course they did. Packs notice everything. But what they noticed was not what Victoria expected. She expected sympathy, support, the quiet, collective grief of a den that had lost its future heir. And there was some of that. In the first week, people brought food, flowers, small tokens of mourning. The elders blessed Alex's name. The warriors drank to his memory. But after the first week, something shifted. The sympathy that should have surrounded her, the Luna, the mother who had lost her child, began to move. Slowly, quietly, away from her, and toward Bitgarum. She saw it in the way people looked at him when they thought she wasn't watching, the way they gathered around him in the great hall, voices low, hands on his shoulder, the way the conversation stopped when she entered a room, not because they didn't want to talk in front of her, but because they had already decided whose grief mattered more. The Alpha had lost his heir, his son, his legacy. The Luna had lost a child. One was a tragedy, the other was a private pain. Victoria didn't understand it, not at first. She was too deep in her own grief to see the shape of what was happening around her. But slowly, over days, over weeks, it became impossible to ignore. She was being edged out, gently, quietly, without anyone saying it out loud, and Bitgarum was letting it happen. Lyra was the only one who stayed. She came every day, sometimes twice. She sat with Victoria in the too quiet chamber and didn't try to fill the silence with empty words. She just existed beside her. A presence. A tether. The one person in Victoria's rapidly shrinking world who didn't look at her like she was broken. "You're allowed to be angry," Lyra said one afternoon. Victoria looked at her. "At who?" "At him." Lyra's voice was soft, careful. "At Bitgarum, for the way he's treating you." Victoria shook her head. "He's grieving too." "Is he?" The question hung in the air between them. Lyra didn't push it. She let it sit there, quiet and unresolved. And after a moment, she changed the subject. But the question stayed with Victoria, long after Lyra left. Is he? By the end of the month, Bitgarum wasn't hiding it anymore. The blame, the coldness, the distance that had been growing between them since the night Alec died. It was out in the open now, sharp-edged and undeniable. He stopped coming to their chamber at night. He slept elsewhere, in his study or in one of the guest rooms. Victoria didn't know and didn't ask. When he was around her, his face was a mask. No warmth, no grief, just nothing. And when he spoke to her, it was always the same. "You should have been there. You left him. This is your fault." He never said the last one out loud. He didn't have to. It was in his eyes every time he looked at her, in the set of his jaw, in the way he moved through the pack house, like she wasn't there. Victoria started to believe him, not because it was true, but because when someone tells you something often enough, when the world around you starts to reflect it back, when the pack comforts your husband and avoids your eyes, it becomes harder and harder to remember what the truth actually was. She was drowning, slowly, quietly, and no one was throwing her a rope, except Lyra. And that, Victoria would realize later, was the cruelest part of all. Chapter 8, the order came 6 weeks after Alec's death. Victoria was in the sitting room, not doing anything, just existing in the space, staring at the wall the way she did most days now. When Bitgarum walked in, he didn't knock. He never knocked anymore. This was his house, his den, his pack. The fact that it was her chamber too was irrelevant. He stood in the doorway, looked at her. "I'm suspending your duties," he said. Victoria blinked. The words took a moment to land. "What?" "Your duties, to the pack. You're suspended from them, effective immediately." She sat up straighter. Her mind, sluggish from weeks of grief and isolation, tried to catch up. "Why?" "Because you're in mourning." His voice was calm, reasonable, the voice of a man making a logical decision. "The pack understands. They don't expect you to function right now. It's better if you step back. Focus on healing." "I didn't ask to step back." "You don't need to ask." Bitgarum's eyes didn't leave hers. "I'm telling you, as your alpha." The word landed like a slap. Not mate, not husband, alpha. Victoria felt something tighten in her chest. Not the bond, something else, something closer to fear. "For how long?" she asked. "Until I decide you're ready." "And when will that be?" Bitgarum didn't answer. He looked at her for a long moment, that look that said everything without saying anything. And then he turned and walked out. The door closed behind him. Victoria sat in the silence and felt the walls of her world shrink a little more. The pack accepted it without question. Of course they did. The alpha had made a decision. The Luna was grieving. It made sense. It was compassionate even, giving her time to recover, protecting her from the weight of responsibility she clearly couldn't carry right now. No one asked Victoria if that was what she wanted. No one asked if being locked away in a silent chamber with nothing to do but think about her dead son was helping her heal. They just nodded and moved on and filled the gaps she left behind. Victoria watched it happen from a distance. She saw the meetings continue without her, the governance, the disputes, the daily work of keeping the pack running. All of it carried on as though she had never been part of it. As though her absence didn't matter. She tried, once, to attend a council session. She walked into the great hall, took her seat at the table and opened her mouth to speak. Bitgaram looked at her, just looked at her, and the look said, "Leave." She left. No one stopped her. The isolation was deliberate. Victoria understood that now. Not all at once, but slowly, the way you understand something your body knows before your mind catches up. Bitgaram wasn't just grieving differently than her. He wasn't just pulling away. He was erasing her. Quietly, methodically, piece by piece, he was removing her from the pack's consciousness, from their daily life, from the structures of power and decision-making that had once included her. And he was doing it in a way that looked like kindness. She's mourning. Give her space. Let her heal. It was the perfect cover, because who could argue with that? Who could stand up and say, no, actually, isolating a grieving mother is cruel, not kind? Who would believe them? Victoria felt it tightening around her like a net, and she had no idea how to get out. Lyra came every day. That was the one constant, the one thread Victoria could hold on to. No matter how small her world became, no matter how silent the chamber, no matter how many days passed without her speaking to anyone else, Lyra was there. She brought food, made sure Victoria ate, sat with her in the long, empty afternoons and talked about nothing, or talked about everything, or didn't talk at all. She was the only person in Victoria's life who still treated her like a person, like someone worth caring about, like someone who mattered. "He's not letting you leave, is he?" Lyra said one afternoon. It wasn't a question. Victoria looked at her. "He says I need time. Do you feel like you need time?" Victoria didn't answer. Lyra's hand found hers, squeezed, warm and steady and real. "I'm here," Lyra said quietly. "No matter what, you're not alone." Victoria held on to those words like a lifeline. She didn't know they were the rope she was going to hang herself with. 2 months after Alex's death, Victoria stopped leaving the chamber entirely. Not because Bitgaram ordered her to stay, because she had nowhere to go. No duties, no purpose, no place in the pack anymore. The chamber was her world now. 4 walls and a window, and the ghost of a child who used to sleep in the corner. She stopped brushing her hair, stopped changing her clothes unless Lyra made her, stopped eating unless food was put directly in her hands. The numbness that had started as protection, a wall between her and the pain, had become something else, something deeper, a fog that wrapped around her and didn't lift. She was disappearing, not dying, disappearing, fading into the background of her own life until there was nothing left but the shape of her. Bitgaram came by once a week, checked on her the way you check on something you've stored in a closet and mostly forgotten about. He didn't stay long. He didn't speak much. He just looked at her, made sure she was still breathing, and left. And Victoria sat in the silence and tried to remember what it felt like to be a person who mattered. She couldn't. Chapter 9. Victoria was in the corridor when she heard them. She didn't mean to be. She had been in the chamber for so long, weeks, maybe longer, she had stopped counting, that the walls had started to feel like they were closing in. So she walked, just to move, just to feel like her body still worked. The pack house was quieter than usual. Mid-afternoon, most people were working, or training, or doing whatever it was people did when they had purpose. Victoria moved through the halls like a ghost, and no one looked at her twice. She was rounding a corner near the kitchens when she heard the voices. Low, urgent. A conversation people have when they think no one is listening. Victoria stopped. She didn't mean to eavesdrop. Or maybe she did. Maybe some part of her, the part that hadn't completely given up yet, needed to know that the world was still turning, that people were still talking, that life was still happening somewhere outside the four walls of her grief. She pressed herself against the wall, listened. Can't believe she still doesn't know. How could she not? She's his mate. The bond tells her every time he... Maybe she knows, and she's just pretending. Some women do that, easier than facing it. I don't think she's pretending. I think she genuinely has no idea. A pause. The sound of something being moved. Plates, maybe, or pots. It's sad, really. He's been with her since before the wedding. Everyone knows. Even Silas knew. But the Luna? She just trusted him. She's always been like that. Too open. Too naive. Well, she's about to find out. The ceremony's in 2 weeks. He's making it official. A new Luna? That's what I heard. He's tired of pretending. Another pause. Longer this time. And the child? What about the child? The way he died. You don't think... Don't. The voice was sharp now. Afraid. Don't even say it. You know what happens to people who talk about that. I'm just saying. The servant didn't... The servant is dead. And if you want to stay alive, you'll stop asking questions. Silence. Then footsteps. Moving away. The conversation over. Victoria stood in the corridor and didn't move. Her mind was trying to process what she had just heard. Trying and failing. Because the words didn't fit. They didn't fit into the shape of her life. Into the world she had been living in for the past 5 years. They were foreign objects, sharp-edged and wrong, and her brain kept bouncing off them like trying to hold on to something covered in oil. He's been with her since before the wedding. The ceremony's in 2 weeks. A new Luna. The child. It wasn't true. It couldn't be true. Bitgarum loved her. The bond was sacred. They were fated. The gods had woven them together before either of them was born. You didn't betray a bond like that. You didn't lie to your mate for years. You didn't. The servant didn't. Victoria's hands were shaking. She pressed them flat against the stone wall, tried to steady herself, tried to breathe. This was gossip. Just gossip. Servants talked. They made things up. They exaggerated. This was nothing. This was everyone knows. Even Silas knew. Silas, the pack physician, the man who had been treating her for 3 years, the man who had looked her in the eye, again and again, and told her the bond was strong, her body was adjusting, everything was fine. If he knew, if everyone knew, Victoria's knees gave out. She slid down the wall and sat on the cold stone floor, her back pressed against the corridor, her hands still shaking, her breath coming in short, shallow gasps. This wasn't real. This couldn't be real. But the servants had no reason to lie to each other. And suddenly, sickeningly, 100 small things that hadn't made sense began to click into place. The sickness, the way it came and went without pattern, without reason. Bitgarum's absences, the nights he didn't come to bed, the meetings that ran late, the hours unaccounted for, the way the bond had felt sometimes. Not warm, not steady, but strained, like something pulling against itself. The way people looked at her, the pity in their eyes that she had mistaken for concern. She just trusted him. Victoria pressed her hands to her mouth. She wanted to scream. She wanted to run. She wanted to go back to the chamber and crawl into bed and pull the covers over her head and pretend she had never heard any of this. But she couldn't move. Because if this was true, if any of this was true, then everything she had believed about her life was a lie. Chapter 10. Victoria didn't sleep that night. She lay in the bed and stared at the ceiling and turned the servant's words over and over in her mind like stones in her hands, trying to find the cracks, trying to find the places where they didn't fit. She couldn't find any. And that was the problem. Because the more she thought about it, the more she let herself think about it, really think about it, without the fog of grief or the weight of trust getting in the way, the more it made a terrible, horrible kind of sense. The sickness, the bond, the way Begarum had pulled away after Alex's death, not toward her, but away, like he had been waiting for an excuse. The way Silas had never actually cured her, never actually explained what was wrong. The way the pack had sided with Begarum so easily, so completely, like they had already decided whose story to believe. By the time the sun came up, Victoria had made a decision. She needed to know, not because she believed it. She didn't, she couldn't. But because the doubt was eating her alive. And the only way to kill doubt was to prove it wrong. She needed proof, evidence, something concrete that would show her this was all a misunderstanding, a cruel rumor, a lie someone had started for reasons she didn't understand. She needed someone she could trust to find the truth. His name was Gareth. He was a scout, one of the younger ones, mid-20s, a competent wolf who did his job well and didn't ask for recognition. Victoria had worked with him during her time handling pack duties. He had always been respectful, honest. He was a person who answered questions directly and didn't play games. She found him in the training yard 2 days later. It took her that long to work up the nerve, to leave the chamber, to walk through the pack house without falling apart, to approach someone and ask for help without her voice breaking. She waited until he was alone, waited until the yard had cleared out after the afternoon drills. Then she walked up to him, hands clasped in front of her to keep them from shaking. Gareth. He turned. Surprise flickered across his face. Not that she was there, but that she was speaking, that she was functioning. She saw it in his eyes, the same look everyone gave her now. Pity, careful distance. My Luna. He bowed his head slightly, respectful. I need your help. He straightened. Of course. Anything. Victoria took a breath. I need you to ask some questions, quietly, without anyone knowing I sent you. His brow furrowed. Questions about what? She looked at him, really looked at him, trying to read whether this was a mistake, whether he was trustworthy, whether she was about to make everything worse. But she was out of options. About the alpha, she said quietly. About what people are saying, about whether it's true. Understanding dawned slowly in his eyes, followed by something else, something that looked like discomfort. He knew. Of course he knew. Everyone knew. Everyone except her. My Luna, please. The word came out smaller than she meant it to. I just need to know. I need someone to tell me the truth. Can you do that? Gareth looked at her for a long moment. Then he nodded. I'll find out what I can. Waiting was the worst part. Victoria had thought the grief was the worst thing she would ever feel. The numbness, the loss, the weight of Alec's absence pressing down on her chest every waking moment. She was wrong. This was worse. Because grief was clean. Grief was honest. Grief was something she understood. This crawling, gnawing suspicion that everything she had built her life on was rotten underneath, was something else entirely. She couldn't eat, couldn't sit still, couldn't stop her mind from running through every memory, every moment, every conversation with Bitgarum, and rewriting it with this new, terrible possibility, layered over the top. What if it was true? What if he had been lying to her for years? What if the bond she had trusted, the bond she had given everything to, had been a weapon pointed at her the entire time? What if Alec died because... She couldn't finish the thought. She sat in the chamber and waited, and tried not to fall apart before Gareth came back. Chapter 11. Gareth came back 3 days later. He slipped into her chamber after dark, when the corridors were quiet and most of the pack was asleep. Victoria had been sitting by the window, staring out at nothing, when she heard the soft knock. She opened the door. Gareth's face told her everything before he spoke. "I'm sorry, my Luna." 4 words. Heavy. Victoria's hands tightened on the edge of the door. "Tell me?" Gareth stepped inside. He didn't sit. He stood near the door, like he was ready to leave the moment this conversation was over, like he didn't want to be here any longer than necessary. "It's true," he said. "All of it." Victoria felt the floor tilt underneath her. The Alpha has been involved with someone for years, since before your marriage, according to what I could find. It's not a secret. Most of the pack knows. "Who?" Gareth hesitated. "Who is it?" Victoria's voice was harder now, sharper. "I don't know her name. I didn't ask. I thought, it doesn't matter." Victoria's hands were shaking again. She pressed them against her sides. "What else?" Gareth took a breath. "The sickness you've had, the healers, they knew what it was. The pack physician Silas, he knew. It's the bond. When a mate is unfaithful, the bond reacts. It tries to tell you. Your body was telling you the whole time." Victoria felt something crack inside her chest. Not the bond, something deeper. "And my child?" Gareth's face went pale. "My Luna, I don't think..." "Tell me." Her voice was ice now, hard, unyielding. "The servant, Marin, she didn't have the child when he died." The room went silent. "What?" "The Alpha requested him. That day, he sent for the child. Marin handed him over. That's protocol. When the Alpha requests something, you don't refuse. The child was with the Alpha when it happened." Victoria couldn't breathe. The Alpha was in his private study, with the woman. And the child? Gareth's voice cracked. The child wandered out, into the courtyard. The guards didn't see him until it was too late. The animal was already... "Stop!" Gareth stopped. Victoria was shaking now. Her whole body, like something inside her, was trying to tear itself loose. "The servant," she said. "Marin, where is she?" Gareth's silence was answer enough. "She's dead, isn't she?" "Yes, my Luna. She was executed that same day by the Alpha's order." "For what crime?" "Negligence, allowing the prince to be harmed." "But she didn't have him." "No." "So she was killed to cover up?" "Yes." The word hung in the air between them like a blade. Victoria turned away. She walked to the window, looked out at the dark, at the pack grounds below, quiet and still, everyone asleep, everyone pretending the world was normal, Her son was dead. Not because of an accident, not because of fate or bad luck or the god's cruelty, because Bitgaram had been fucking his mistress and wasn't paying attention, and he had blamed Victoria. He had looked her in the eye, day after day, week after week, and told her it was her fault, that she should have been there, that she had failed their son. While he knew, the entire time, he knew, and he let an innocent woman die to hide it. There's one more thing. Victoria turned. Gareth was looking at the floor now, like he couldn't bear to look at her. What? There's going to be a ceremony. In 2 weeks, a mating ceremony. The alpha he's planning to take a new Luna. Victoria felt the words land like stones into deep water. Everyone in the pack knows, Gareth continued quietly. They've known for a while. They're just waiting for him to make it official. And no one told me. They thought you knew, my Luna. They thought. The bond tells you when your mate is unfaithful. It's not subtle. They thought you were choosing to ignore it, to endure it, the way some Lunas do when their mates have power. Victoria laughed. It came out sharp and broken and wrong. I didn't know, she said. I trusted him. I trusted all of you, and none of you— Her voice cracked. None of you thought to tell me the truth. Gareth bowed his head. I'm sorry, my Luna. Victoria turned back to the window. Get out. My Luna. Get out. Gareth left. The door closed behind him, and Victoria stood in the silence of the chamber and felt every lie she had ever believed shatter into pieces around her. Chapter 12. Victoria needed to tell someone. She needed someone who would understand, someone who would be on her side, someone who would help her figure out what to do next, because she had no idea what to do next, and the weight of it was crushing her. She needed Lyra. Lyra would know what to do. Lyra always knew what to do. And Lyra had been there, had been the only one there, through all of this. The grief, the isolation, the slow unraveling of everything Victoria thought she knew. Lyra would help her. Victoria left the chamber. She moved through the corridors quickly, her heart pounding, her hands still shaking. She needed to find her, needed to say it out loud to someone who would believe her, who would see how wrong this was, who would— She stopped. Something had stopped her. Not a sound, not a thought, something deeper. An instinct she didn't have a name for. Lyra's chambers were ahead, just down the corridor. But Victoria's feet wouldn't move. She didn't know why. She stood there, in the empty hallway, and felt something shift inside her. A question she didn't want to ask, a thread she didn't want to pull. Had Lyra known all these while? Victoria had never asked, never thought to. Lyra was her friend, her best friend, the one person she trusted without question. But she had trusted Bitgaram too, and Silas, and the pack, and all of them had known. All of them had lied. Who is the mistress? Gareth hadn't told her. She hadn't asked. But now, Victoria turned, not toward Lyra's chambers, toward Bitgaram's study, the forbidden one, the one no one was allowed to enter, not the council room, not the office where he met with advisors, the private one, the one with the lock and the rule and the unspoken understanding that if you valued your position in the pack, you wouldn't go near it. Victoria had never been inside. She walked toward it now, down the corridor, past the guards. There were no guards, not here, not this late. Past the locked doors and the empty halls. The study door was closed. She stood in front of it, her hand on the handle. She could turn around. She could go back to the chamber. She could pretend she hadn't heard the servants, hadn't sent Gareth, hadn't learned the truth. She could live the rest of her life not knowing. Or she could open the door. She opened the door. The first thing she saw was skin. Bare skin. A tangle of limbs. The firelight moving across two bodies on the leather couch near the window. Bitgarum and Lyra. Naked. Entwined. Mid-thrust. His hands on her hips, her head thrown back. The sound of her breath filling the room. They froze. Both of them. At the same moment, their heads turned toward the door, toward Victoria, and for one long, impossible second, no one moved. Bitgarum pulled back, stood. He didn't bother covering himself, didn't reach for his clothes. He just stood there, naked and unashamed, and looked at her. Lyra sat up, slower. Her face was doing something, shifting, like she was deciding what expression to wear. She settled on remorse. Victoria, don't. Victoria's voice came out flat, empty, like all the air had been sucked out of her lungs. We didn't want you to find out like this, Bitgarum said. His voice was calm, measured, the same voice he used for everything. We were going to tell you, after the ceremony. The ceremony. Victoria's eyes moved from him to Lyra, back to him. The one where you make her Luna. Yes. The word was so simple, so matter-of-fact. Like this was normal, like this was fine. Lyra stood. She reached for her dress, draped over the back of a chair, and pulled it on. Slowly, like she had all the time in the world. Victoria? Her voice was soft, gentle, the same voice she had used 1,000 times before. The voice of a friend. I know this is hard, but you have to understand. How long? Lyra stopped. What? How long? Victoria's eyes were on her now. Only her. How long have you been fucking my husband? Lyra's face changed. The remorse dropped. What replaced it was something colder, sharper. Since before you married him, she said. The room tilted. Since before, Lyra repeated. He was mine first, Victoria. You knew that, or you should have. The bond doesn't make you blind. It tells you every time. You just chose not to listen. Victoria felt something inside her snap. I trusted you. I know. Lyra's voice was almost kind. That's what made it so easy. Bitgarum stepped forward. He was dressing now, pulling on his pants, his shirt, like this was a normal evening, like they were having a normal conversation. You can stay if you want, he said. As Luna, in title. I won't take that from you, but Lyra will be my mate, my real mate, the one who actually matters. Our son is dead. The words came out before Victoria could stop them. Bitgarum's hands stilled on his shirt. Our son is dead, Victoria repeated. Her voice was shaking now. And you, I know. You were with her when he died. I know. You killed him. It was an accident. You killed an innocent woman to hide it. Bitgarum's eyes met hers, cold, hard, utterly without remorse. She knew the risk when she took the job. Victoria stared at him. This was the man she had loved, the man she had given everything to, the man she had believed, with every part of herself, was good. And he was a monster. You blamed me, she said quietly. You looked at me every day for 2 months, and you told me it was my fault. It was easier that way. For who? For both of us. Victoria's hands clenched into fists at her sides. I'll tell them, she said. I'll tell the pack. I'll tell the elders. I'll tell everyone what you did. Bitgarum smiled. It was not a kind smile. No, you won't. Yes, you won't. His voice was calm, final. Because I'm the alpha, And you're the grieving Luna who's been unstable for months. Who do you think they'll believe? Victoria's mouth opened. Closed. Because he was right. He had already written the story, already shaped the narrative. The pack had already chosen a side, and it wasn't hers. Bitgarm walked toward the door, stopped beside her. The ceremony is in 2 weeks, he said. You're welcome to attend, or you can leave. Either way, Lyra will be Luna. And you? He looked at her. You'll be nothing. He walked out. Lyra followed. She paused at the door, looked back at Victoria one last time. I really did care about you, she said, for what it's worth. Then she was gone. And Victoria stood alone in the study, in the room where her entire life had just ended, and felt the bond in her chest finally start to break. Chapter 13. Victoria walked back to the chamber. She didn't run, didn't cry, didn't scream. She walked, one foot in front of the other, through the corridors, past the empty halls, past the sleeping pack, past everything. Her mind was blank, not numb, past numb, blank. Like someone had taken everything inside her and poured it out and left nothing behind but the shape of a person walking. She reached the chamber, closed the door behind her, locked it. And then she stood in the center of the room and looked at the bed where she had slept beside Bitgaram for 5 years. The bed where they had conceived Alec. The bed where she had believed, with every part of herself, that she was loved. It was all a lie. Every word, every touch, every moment, a lie. The bond was still there. She could feel it. Faint now. Weaker than it had been before she walked into that study, before she saw them together, but still there. A thread in her chest, a connection she hadn't asked for, hadn't chosen, that the gods had woven between them before either of them had drawn breath. A sacred thing, a permanent thing. Victoria had believed that. She had believed the bond was unbreakable, that fated mates were bound for life, through death, through everything. She didn't believe it anymore, and if the bond could be broken, she was going to break it. She didn't know how. Not exactly. The elders spoke about it sometimes, in warnings, in cautionary tales. Breaking a fated bond was forbidden, dangerous. It was a thing that could kill you if you did it wrong, if your will wasn't strong enough, if the bond fought back and won. But Victoria didn't care. She would rather die than carry this connection to him for one more second. She sat on the floor, cross-legged, hands on her knees, breathing slow and deep. The bond hummed in her chest, quiet, constant, the way it had hummed for 5 years. She reached for it, not with her hands, with something deeper, with the part of her that could feel it, that had always felt. It, the part that the bond lived inside. She grabbed it, and she pulled. The pain was immediate, not physical, worse than physical. It was like something inside her chest was tearing. Not muscle, not bone, but something underneath both of those things. Something that wasn't supposed to be touched, wasn't supposed to be moved. The bond resisted. It didn't want to break. It was old magic, older than her, older than Bitgarm, older than the pack, older than the land, older than anything either of them had ever known. And old magic doesn't let go easily. Victoria gritted her teeth and pulled harder. The pain spiked. She gasped, a sharp, involuntary sound that came out of her throat before she could stop it. Her hands clenched into fists. Her nails dug into her palms hard enough to draw blood. The bond fought back. It sent signals through her body, sharp, chaotic, wrong. Her heart stuttered, her vision blurred. The room tilted sideways and she had to brace herself on the floor to keep from falling. "Stop," the bond said, not in words, in feeling. "Stop. You will die." Victoria didn't stop. She pulled. The breaking happened all at once, not gradually, not gently. One moment the bond was there, resisting, fighting, clinging to the space inside her chest with everything it had. And the next moment it snapped. The sound it made wasn't a sound. It was a feeling, like something enormous and invisible had been cut with a blade, and the severed ends recoiled, whipping back into the dark. Victoria screamed. She couldn't help it. The pain was so total, so consuming, that it knocked every other thought out of her head. She collapsed onto the floor. Hands pressed to her chest, body curled in on itself, gasping for air that didn't seem to reach her lungs. The bond was gone. She could feel the absence of it, the space where it used to be. A hollow, aching void in the center of her chest, like someone had reached in and scooped something vital out and left her with nothing but the edges. She lay on the floor and shook, and slowly, so slowly, the pain began to fade, not disappear, fade into something duller, something she could breathe around. She pushed herself up, sat. Her hands were trembling, her whole body was trembling. But the bond was gone. She was free. The silence was the worst part. For 5 years, the bond had been there, a constant hum, a presence in the back of her mind, in the center of her chest, that she had learned to tune out the way you tune out the sound of your own heartbeat. Now it was gone, and the silence it left behind was so loud it felt like drowning. Victoria sat on the floor of the empty chamber and felt the absence of him. Not the man, the connection, the thing that had tied her to Bitgaram, whether she wanted it or not, that had pulled at her and whispered to her and told her, again and again, that this was where she belonged. It was gone. She had cut it out, and now there was nothing. She didn't sleep. She sat on the floor until the sky outside the window began to lighten. Gray, then pale, then gold. Dawn. A new day. The first day of the rest of her life. A life without Bitgaram. Without the bond. Without the pack. Without anything. Victoria stood. Her legs were unsteady. Her body felt wrong. Lighter than it should be. Unbalanced. Like someone had removed a weight she had been carrying for so long she had forgotten it was there. She looked around the chamber. 5 years of her life had happened here. Marriage, pregnancy, motherhood, grief, all of it in these 4 walls. She didn't take anything. No clothes, no keepsakes, no reminders. She walked to the door, opened it, and stepped out into the corridor. The pack house was still sleeping. The halls were empty. No guards, no servants, no one to see her leave. She walked through the corridors, one last time, out the main doors, into the cold morning air, and she didn't look back. Chapter 14. The journey home took 2 days. Victoria walked. She didn't have a horse, didn't have supplies, didn't have anything except the clothes on her back and the hollow space in her chest where the bond used to be. She walked through the forest, along the old roads, past the markers she remembered from childhood. The split oak, the stone bridge, the ridge that overlooked the valley where her father's den sat tucked against the hillside. By the time she reached the door, her feet were bleeding. Her body was exhausted, but she was there, home. She knocked. Her father opened the door. He was older than she remembered, grayer, the lines around his eyes deeper, the set of his shoulders heavier. But his eyes were the same, sharp, clear, missing nothing. He looked at her, and she saw the exact moment he felt it, the bond, or the absence of it. His face went still. Victoria. She nodded. She couldn't speak. Her throat was too tight. He stepped aside. Let her in. The den was smaller than she remembered. Or maybe she was just bigger, older, changed in ways she couldn't name. But the main room, the hearth, the table, the worn chairs by the fire, looked exactly the way it had when she was a child. Her father closed the door behind her, didn't ask questions. He just gestured to the chair by the fire. Sit. She sat. He brought her water. Food. She drank the water. Couldn't touch the food. He sat across from her and waited. The bond is broken. It wasn't a question. Victoria nodded. Her father's jaw tightened. Did he? No. Her voice was raw, barely there. I broke it. Silence. Why? Victoria looked at the fire, watched the flames move, tried to find words for something that was too large to fit into words. Because I had to, she said finally. Her father leaned forward, his elbows on his knees, his hands clasped, the posture of a man trying very hard not to lose his temper. What did he do? I don't want to talk about it. Victoria, please. She looked at him. Please. I need to stay here for a while. I can't go back. I can't. Her voice cracked. She stopped, took a breath. Please. Her father looked at her for a long time. Then he nodded. You can stay as long as you need. The days blurred together. Victoria spent most of them in her old room, the one she had grown up in, small, simple. A bed, a window, a shelf with books she hadn't touched in years. She lay on the bed and stared at the ceiling and tried to figure out what to do next. She had no plan, no allies, no power. Bidgaram was the alpha. He had the pack. He had Lyra. He had everything. And she had nothing. Not the bond, not her son, not her title, not her friend, not her husband, nothing. The weight of it pressed down on her chest. Heavier than the bond had ever been, heavier than grief, heavier than anything she had ever carried. She had lost everything. And the man who had taken it from her was going to walk away clean. No consequences, no justice, no reckoning. He was going to win. Unless... Victoria sat up. The thought had come quietly. Not loud, not dramatic, just there. Unless she made him pay. She couldn't do it alone. She knew that. She had no standing in the pack, no authority, no one who would believe her over him. But there were others. Others who hated Bidgaram. Others who would want to see him fall. She just had to find them. Chapter 15. The Vampire Lord's territory was 3 days' travel to the west. Victoria knew the way. Everyone in Thornwood knew the way. Not because they went there, but because they were taught from childhood where the borders were, where the danger started, where you didn't cross unless you wanted to die. Bidgaram and the Vampire Lord had been enemies for years. Border disputes, old grudges, hatred that ran deep and cold and didn't need a reason anymore. If anyone would help her destroy Bidgaram, it was him. She left at dawn, told her father she needed to travel. Didn't say where. He didn't ask. He just looked at her with that same worried expression he'd been wearing since she arrived, and let her go. The journey was long, cold, dangerous. Victoria didn't care. She had nothing left to lose. The Vampire Lord's stronghold was carved into the side of a mountain. Black stone, high walls, gates that looked like they hadn't been opened in decades. Victoria stood at the base of the hill and looked up at it. And for the first time since she left her father's den, she felt something close to fear. Not of the Vampire Lord, of what she was about to do. This was a line. Once she crossed it, there was no going back. She climbed the hill, knocked on the gate. It opened. The throne room was cavernous, high ceilings, stone pillars, torches burning along the walls that cast long flickering shadows across the floor. And at the far end, seated on a throne that looked like it had been carved from a single piece of obsidian, the vampire lord. He was younger than Victoria expected, or maybe just ageless in the way vampires were. Pale, dark-haired, sharp-featured. His eyes moved over her with the kind of casual assessment that made her skin crawl. "The Luna of Thornwood," he said. His voice was smooth, amused. What an unexpected pleasure. Victoria stepped forward. Her hands were clenched at her sides to keep them from shaking. "I need your help." The vampire lord smiled. It was not a kind smile. "Do you now?" Victoria told him everything. The cheating, the years of lies, the sickness, the bond, Alec's death, the cover-up, the execution of the servant, the betrayal, Lyra, all of it. She laid it out in front of him like pieces on a board and waited for his reaction. He listened, didn't interrupt, didn't react, just sat on his throne with his fingers steepled and his eyes on her. And when she finished, he was quiet for a long moment. Then he laughed. It was a soft laugh, almost gentle, but there was something underneath it that was anything but. "You poor, naive little thing." Victoria's jaw tightened. "You came all the way here," the vampire lord continued, "risking your life, crossing enemy territory, to ask me, to help you get revenge on your husband. And you thought I would do it out of the goodness of my heart. I thought you would do it because you hate him. I do hate him. But that doesn't mean I help you for free." Victoria's hands tightened into fists. "What do you want?" The vampire lord stood, walked down the steps from his throne, slowly, deliberately. He stopped a few feet from her, and his eyes moved over her body in a way that made her stomach turn. "If you want my help," he said quietly, "you'll have to earn it. Grace my bed. Prove to me you're serious." The words hung in the air like smoke. Victoria stared at him. "No." The vampire lord smiled. "Then we have nothing more to discuss." He turned, walked back to his throne, sat down. "You can see yourself out." Victoria turned and walked, out of the throne room, down the hall, through the gates, down the hill. And when she was far enough away that no one could see her, she stopped and broke. The tears came hard and fast, not quiet, not controlled. She sank to her knees on the cold ground and cried for her son, for her marriage, for the betrayal, for the humiliation, for the fact that she had come all this way and thrown away her pride and it hadn't mattered. She had nothing. No one. No way forward. She had lost. She pressed her hands to her face and sobbed. And then, "I will help you." Victoria froze. The voice came from behind her, deep, steady, unfamiliar. She turned. Chapter 16. He was tall. That was the first thing she noticed. Taller than any wolf she had ever seen. Taller than the vampire lord. Taller than seemed physically possible. His frame was broad, his posture perfectly upright. And his eyes were gold. Not hazel. Not amber. Gold. The color of fire, of molten metal, of something that didn't belong in a human face. The Drago Lord. Victoria had heard of him. Everyone had. The most powerful being in the region. The one who stayed out of everything. Pack politics, vampire wars, territorial disputes. He ruled his own kingdom in the mountains to the north and had never, in all the years anyone could remember, taken a side. And he was standing in front of her, offering to help. He had heard all Victoria had explained to the vampire lord while in the chamber. Why? It was the only word Victoria could manage. The Drago Lord tilted his head slightly. Because what was done to you breaks ancient law. I don't understand. The mate bond is sacred. It was forged by the Drago race millennia ago, a gift to the other species, a way to bind souls in ways that would last beyond death. When that bond is abused, when it is used as a weapon, when a child dies because of negligence and is buried under lies. He paused. The magic itself cries out, I heard it, and I cannot stand by. Victoria stared at him. You were in there, she said slowly. In the throne room. You heard everything I said. I was. And you didn't say anything. I wanted to see what he would do. What you would do. The Drago Lord's eyes held hers. You refused him. That took courage. Victoria laughed. It came out bitter. Broken. It wasn't courage. It was desperation. Courage and desperation often look the same. Victoria stood. Slowly. Her legs were unsteady. Her hands were still shaking. Why should I trust you? You shouldn't. The Drago Lord's voice was calm, matter of fact. You don't know me. I don't know you. But I am offering you what you came here looking for. A way to bring him down. How? Not with fire. Not with war. Those are loud. Obvious. He would see them coming. The Drago Lord stepped closer. Not threatening. Just present. We do this carefully. We pull the threads that hold his power together. We expose him. We let the truth do the work. Victoria's throat was tight. The pack won't believe me. They've already chosen him. Then we don't go to the pack. We go to the people who matter. The elders, the other alphas, the ones who care about law, about justice, about the integrity of the bond itself. He paused. You are not powerless, Victoria. You are the wronged Luna, the fated mate who was betrayed, the mother whose child was killed and whose death was covered up. You have a story. And stories have power. Victoria looked at him. She wanted to believe him. Wanted to believe that there was a way forward, that she wasn't as alone as she felt. But she had trusted before, and it had cost her everything. What do you want in return? She asked quietly. The Drago Lord met her eyes. Nothing you're not willing to give. They began to plan that same day. Not in the throne room, not in the vampire lord's territory. The Drago Lord had a place. A quiet hall carved into the northern ridge, overlooking the valley. It was simple, clean, a place that didn't announce itself. He spread maps across the table, drew connections, explained the political landscape, who owed whom favors, who hated Bitgaram, who could be swayed, who could be trusted. Victoria listened, asked questions, contributed what she knew, and somewhere in the planning, somewhere between the second hour and the third, she realized something. He wasn't treating her like a victim. He was treating her like an equal. We'll start with the healing, the Drago Lord said. Victoria looked up. What? Your body, the bond. It's been poisoned for years. Even though you've broken it, the damage is still there. We need to remove it, cleanse it. Otherwise, you'll carry it with you. In your health, in your strength, you won't be able to do what needs to be done. You can do that. I can. He looked at her. But it will take time, and it will not be pleasant. Victoria nodded. I don't care. Good. That night, Victoria slept in a guest chamber in the Drago Lord's hall. It was the first real sleep she had had in weeks. Not restful, not peaceful, but deep. Sleep that comes when your body finally stops running. When she woke, the sun was coming through the window in long golden slants. The air smelled clean. And for the first time since the night she found Bitgaram and Lyra together, Victoria felt something other than grief. She felt possibility. Small, fragile, barely there, but real. She got up, dressed, walked to the main hall. The Drago Lord was already there, waiting. He looked at her, and something in his expression shifted, just slightly. Something that might have been respect. "Ready?" he asked. Victoria nodded. "Let's begin." Chapter 17. The healing began the next morning. Victoria woke before dawn, a habit she hadn't broken, even here, even in a place that wasn't home. She dressed and walked to the main hall, and the Dragolord was already there, waiting. He didn't greet her, didn't ask if she was ready. He just gestured to the stone platform in the center of the room. Circular, raised slightly off the floor, carved with symbols Victoria didn't recognize. "Sit," he said. She sat. The first session was the worst. Not because of what he did, because of what came out of her. The Drago Lord knelt across from her on the platform. He didn't touch her. Didn't need to. He simply raised one hand, palm out, and spoke words in a language so old it felt like the air itself was vibrating. The magic responded. Victoria felt it immediately, a warmth in the center of her chest where the bond used to be. Not painful, just present. Like someone had reached inside her and placed a hand over the hollow space and was gently, carefully pressing. Then the warmth turned to heat, and the heat turned to burning. She gasped, her hands clenched into fists on her knees. The burning spread, not outward, but inward, deeper, into places she didn't know she had. It found the corruption, the poison, the residue of 5 years of the bond being, twisted and abused and used against her. And it pulled. Victoria screamed. The Drago Lord didn't stop. His voice continued, steady, calm, unshaken. And the magic obeyed. It dragged the corruption out of her body piece by piece, slowly, methodically, like pulling splinters from a wound that had been left untreated for too long. It hurt. Not like the bond breaking. Worse. Because this wasn't tearing something out. This was extracting something that had rooted itself deep, something that had woven itself into her bones and her blood and her breath. The corruption didn't want to leave, but the magic was older, stronger, and it didn't care what the corruption wanted. By the time the session ended, Victoria was shaking, drenched in sweat. Her vision blurred at the edges. The Drago Lord lowered his hand. The magic released. Victoria collapsed forward, gasping. "That's enough for today," he said quietly. She couldn't speak, could barely nod. He helped her to her feet. His hand, steady under her elbow, his grip firm but careful, and guided her back to the guest chamber. She slept for 12 hours straight. The sessions continued for a week, every morning. Same time, same place. Each one as brutal as the first, but each one pulled more of the poison out. And each time, when Victoria woke the next day, she felt lighter, clearer, like someone was slowly removing a veil she hadn't known was there. Her appetite came back. Food tasted like food again, not like ash. She ate. Properly. For the first time in years. Her strength returned. She could walk without exhaustion following her like a shadow. She could stand upright without feeling like her bones were made of glass. And her wolf had been silent for so long, muted, weak. The bond corruption had dulled it, pushed it down, made shifting painful and incomplete. But now, Now she could feel it again. Sharp, clear, strong. On the seventh day, she shifted. It happened in the clearing behind the Drago Lord's Hall. She hadn't planned it. She just felt the pull, and she let it happen. And for the first time in 5 years, the shift was clean. No pain, no struggle, just a smooth, powerful transition from human to wolf. She stood on 4 legs and felt the ground beneath her paws, and the wind in her fur, and the absolute, undeniable aliveness of her body. And she threw her head back and howled. The Drago Lord heard her. He came to the clearing and stood at the edge, watching, not intruding, just present. When Victoria shifted back, human again, breathless, grinning despite herself, he was still there. Better? He asked. Yes. He nodded. Once? Satisfied. Good. Now we can begin. They talked during the healing sessions. Not at first. At first, Victoria was too consumed by the pain, by the process, to do anything but survive it. But as the days went on and the corruption thinned, there was space. Between the pulling and the burning and the gasping, space for words. The Drago Lord filled it. He told her things, not about himself, not directly, but about the world, about the mate bond, about the magic that governed it, about the laws that had been written millennia ago by beings who understood what it meant to bind 2 souls. The bond is sacred, he said one morning, his voice quiet in the stillness of the hall. Not because it's romantic, because it's powerful. 2 souls, woven together before birth, meant to balance each other, to strengthen each other. When it works, it's extraordinary. And when it doesn't? Victoria's voice was hoarse, tired. When it's abused, when one half uses it as a weapon, it becomes poison. The bond reacts. It tries to protect the wronged mate. It sends signals, sickness, pain, weakness, trying to tell you something is wrong. Get out. I didn't listen. You didn't know to listen. That's not your fault. Victoria looked at him, really looked at him. Why do you care? The Drago Lord was quiet for a long moment. Because I've seen what happens when power goes unchecked. When people with authority think they can do whatever they want and face no consequences. I've watched empires rise on the backs of that belief, and I've watched them fall when the truth finally caught up. You're old, Victoria said. Not a question, a realization. Very? How old? Old enough to have seen the mate bond system created. Old enough to remember what it was meant to be. Victoria's breath caught. You were there when it was made. Yes. Then you know. I know what happens when it's broken, when it's twisted, when someone like Big Garum uses it to control someone like you. His eyes met hers, gold and unblinking. And I cannot stand by and let that go unanswered. On the 8th day, the healing was complete. Victoria sat on the platform and felt the magic move through her one last time. Not pulling, not burning, just checking, making sure every piece of corruption was gone. Every root severed, every scar cleaned. When the Drago Lord lowered his hand, the silence that followed was different. It wasn't empty, it was clean. Victoria stood. She felt the difference immediately, not just in her body, in the air around her, in the way the world looked and sounded and felt. She was whole. For the first time in 5 years, she was completely, entirely whole. She looked at the Drago Lord. Thank you. He inclined his head. You're welcome. There was something in the way he looked at her. Something Victoria couldn't quite name. Something that had been growing, quietly, over the past week. during the sessions, during the conversations, during the moments where he had been nothing but steady and present and utterly without judgment. She felt it too, and it terrified her because she knew what it was, and she knew what it meant, and she knew with absolute certainty that it was forbidden. "There's something you should know," the Drago Lord said quietly. They were standing in the clearing now. The sun was setting. The sky was streaked with orange and gold. Victoria turned to him, waited. "The bond between species," he said. "Between wolves and dragons. It's forbidden by ancient law." "Why?" "Because the magic can't sustain it. A wolf's bond is built for another wolf. A dragon's bond is built for another dragon. When you cross those lines, when you try to force the magic to do something it wasn't designed for." He paused. "One of you dies. The bond consumes the weaker one, always." Victoria's chest tightened. "Why are you telling me this?" The Drago Lord looked at her, and for the first time since she had met him, she saw something unguarded in his expression. "Because I needed you to know. Before anything, before we go any further, you needed to know what it would cost." Victoria's throat was tight. She wanted to say something, wanted to ask what he meant by that, what he was implying, what he felt when he looked at her, the way he was looking at her now. But she didn't, because she already knew, and acknowledging it would make it real. "We should focus on Bitgarum," she said quietly. The Dragalord nodded, slowly. "Yes, we should." He turned and walked back toward the hall. Victoria stayed in the clearing and watched the sun go down, and tried not to think about the way her chest ached when he walked away. Chapter 18. The work began in earnest the next day. Not with fire, not with confrontation, with evidence. The Drago Lord had contacts, beings older than the packs, older than the wars, older than the grudges that divided the territories, neutral parties, archivists, witnesses. He called on them now. The first witness was a guard. His name was Talon. Young, mid-20s. One of the wolves who had been on duty the day Alec died. He came to the Drago Lord's hall quietly, under cover of darkness, because he was still part of Thornwood Pack, and being seen talking to the Drago Lord would be problematic. Victoria sat across from him in the small council room. The Drago Lord stood near the window, arms crossed, silent. Talon wouldn't meet her eyes. "Tell her what you saw," the Drago Lord said. His voice was calm, but there was steel underneath it. Talon swallowed. "The child, the prince. I was on patrol that day, near the eastern courtyard. I heard crying, a baby crying. I ran. By the time I got there," his voice cracked. "By the time I got there, the animal was already—" "Where was the alpha?" Victoria's voice was steady, controlled. "In his private study. I went to get him. I knocked. He took a while to answer. When he opened the door, he was—" Talon stopped, looked at the Dragalord. "Say it," the Dragalord said. "He was half-dressed, and there was a woman in there with him. I couldn't see her face, but I knew. Everyone knew." Victoria's hands tightened in her lap. "What happened to the servant?" she asked. "Marin, the one who was supposed to be watching him. She didn't have him that day, my Luna. The Alpha requested him, sent word that morning that he wanted the child brought to his chambers. Marin handed him over. That's protocol. You don't refuse an Alpha's request." "And when the child died?" Talon's face went pale. "Marin was executed that same day, before sunset. The Alpha said she was negligent, that she had failed at her duty, but she didn't have him. Everyone on duty knew that. But no one said anything. Why not? Because the Alpha ordered silence, and if you disobey an Alpha's order— Talon trailed off. Victoria nodded. She understood. The Dragalord stepped forward. He placed a hand on Talon's shoulder, a brief, grounding touch. Will you testify to this? Publicly? Talon hesitated. The Alpha will kill me. The Alpha will not have the power to kill you. Not after this is over. Talon looked at Victoria, and something in his expression shifted. Guilt, maybe. Or shame. Or the weight of carrying a lie for months. I'll testify, he said quietly. They gathered more. 3 other guards who had been on duty that day, all willing to testify. Quietly, carefully, under protection. Servants who had seen Bitgarum and Lyra together. Not once, not twice. Dozens of times over the years. In corridors, in chambers, in places they weren't supposed to be. Records of the execution. The Drago Lord pulled them from Thornwood's archives through a contact who owed him a favor. The record showed exactly what Talon had said. Marin was executed within hours of Alec's death. No trial, no testimony, just an order from the Alpha, and then she was gone. And then there was the memory flame. The truth flame was old magic, older than the packs, older than the territories. Dragon magic, pure and undiluted. It could extract memories from a willing participant and preserve them, not as words, not as descriptions, but as images, as lived experience. The Drago Lord used it on the guards. One by one, they sat before the flame, a small, controlled fire burning in a stone basin, and they gave their memories, willingly, honestly. The flame took them, preserved them, locked them into a form that couldn't be altered or disputed. When it was done, the Drago Lord had everything. The moment Talon found Alec. The moment he went to Bitgarum's study. The door opening. Bitgarum half-dressed, the woman's silhouette in the background. The execution order. Marin's face as she was dragged away, still protesting her innocence. All of it. Irrefutable. He's having the ceremony in 6 days, Victoria said one evening. They were in the council room, the table covered in documents, in testimony, in the carefully assembled pieces of Bitgaram's downfall. The Drago Lord looked up. I know. He's inviting other alphas, representatives from the vampire clans, neutral witnesses. He wants this to be big, official. Good. Victoria frowned. Good? Yes. The Drago Lord leaned back in his chair. He's giving us the perfect stage, a room full of witnesses, other alphas who care about pack law, about tradition, about the integrity of the bond. He thinks he's legitimizing Lyra, but what he's actually doing is giving us the chance to expose him in front of everyone who matters. Victoria's heart beat faster. You want to confront him there, at the ceremony? Not confront, challenge. The Drago Lord's eyes met hers. There's an old law, older than the packs. When a Luna is wronged, when a bond is broken unjustly, the accused can be challenged, not to combat, to truth. All evidence presented publicly, all witnesses called, and the accused must answer. Can he refuse? Technically, yes. But refusing looks like guilt. And Bitgarum is arrogant. He thinks he's covered his tracks. He'll agree. Victoria stood, walked to the window, looked out at the mountains in the distance. And then, we let the truth do the work. She turned, looked at him. Will it be enough? The Drago Lord stood, crossed the room, stopped a few feet from her. Yes, he said. It will be enough. Victoria wanted to believe him. She needed to believe him. Because if this didn't work, If Bitgarum walked away from this unscathed, she had nothing left. Chapter 19. The day of the ceremony arrived cold and clear. Victoria stood in the Drago Lord's hall and stared at her reflection in the polished metal hanging on the wall. She barely recognized herself. She looked strong, healthy, alive in a way she hadn't been in years. Her hair was clean and braided back. Her clothes were simple but well made. Her eyes were clear. She looked like someone who could stand in a room full of alphas and speak the truth. She hoped she was. The Drago Lord appeared in the doorway behind her. "It's time." Victoria nodded, took a breath. They had planned this carefully. The Drago Lord would attend the ceremony, openly, formally, as a representative of his kingdom. His presence alone would shock people. He never attended pack ceremonies. Never. Victoria would not be seen. Not at first. She would wait, hidden, until the moment was right. And then she would walk in, and Bitgarum would see her, and he would know. The ceremony was being held in Thornwood's Great Hall, the same hall where Victoria had presided over pack disputes, where she had sat at the long oak table and listened to grievances and made decisions, where she had been Luna. Now, it was decorated for a different Luna. Torches burned along the walls. Banners hung from the rafters. The hall was full, packed with wolves from Thornwood, representatives from other packs, even a delegation from the vampire clans. Everyone who was anyone had come. Bitgarum stood at the front, tall, composed, the alpha in every line of his body, and beside him, Lyra. She wore white, a ceremonial dress reserved for Luna bindings. Her hair was done up in an elaborate style. She looked radiant. She looked like she had won. The ceremony began. The elders stepped forward. They spoke the old words, the same words they had spoken for Victoria and Bitgarum years ago. The words that bound mates, that made a Luna official, that sealed the bond in front of witnesses. Bitgarum and Lyra stood facing each other, hands clasped, eyes locked. The bond ritual was almost complete. The elder raised his hands, ready to speak the final words. And then a voice cut through the hall. "I invoke the right of challenge." Every head turned. The Drago Lord stood at the back of the hall. He had entered silently. No one had seen him come in. But he was there now, unmistakable, towering, his gold eyes fixed on Bitgarum. The hall went dead silent. Bitgarum's expression didn't change, but something flickered in his eyes. Brief, gone. "The Drago Lord," he said. His voice was calm, measured. "This is unexpected." "Is it?" The Drago Lord walked forward, slowly, every step deliberate. "I invoke the right of challenge under ancient law. The law that predates your pack, your title, your authority. When a Luna is wronged, when a bond is broken unjustly, when a child is killed and the truth is buried, the accused can be challenged." The murmurs started immediately. Low, shocked. One of the other alphas, a gray-haired wolf from the Northern Territories, stood. "The right of challenge hasn't been invoked in centuries." "Then it's overdue," the Drago Lord said. He stopped in the center of the hall, looked at Bitgarum. "You stand accused of betraying your fated mate, of abusing the sacred bond, of negligence that led to the death of your heir, of executing an innocent to cover your crimes. Do you accept the challenge?" Bitgarum's jaw tightened. He could refuse, technically. But every eye in the hall was on him now. Every alpha, every elder, every witness. Refusing would look like guilt, and Bitgarum was too arrogant to look guilty. "I accept," he said. The Drago Lord nodded. "Then, let the truth be heard." Chapter 20. The ceremony stopped. The hall was rearranged. The elders stepped back. Chairs were brought forward, a council formation, with Bitguram seated at one end and the Drago Lord standing at the other. The witnesses filled the room, silent, waiting. The Drago Lord began. Talon of Thornwood, step forward. The young guard stepped into the center of the hall. His face was pale, but his voice was steady. Tell them what you saw the day the prince died. Talon spoke, clearly, without hesitation. He described the crying, the courtyard, the body, the blood, running to Bitgaram's study, the door opening, Bitgaram half-dressed, the woman inside. The hall was silent. Bitgaram sat perfectly still. You're lying, Lyra said from her seat. Her voice was sharp, defensive. I'm not, Talon said quietly, and I'm not the only one who saw it. 3 more guards stepped forward. One by one, they testified. The same story, the same details. The Drago Lord let them speak, let the weight of it build. The memory flame, the Drago Lord said. He gestured. A servant brought forward the stone basin. The flame inside it flickered, small, controlled, ancient. This flame holds the memories of the guards, willingly given, preserved by magic that cannot lie, cannot be altered, cannot be disputed. Watch. He placed his hand over the flame, spoke a single word. The fire flared, and in the air above it, images appeared, not solid, translucent, like smoke given shape, but clear enough. The courtyard, Alec's small body on the ground, the blood, the animal being killed by the guards, Talon running, the study door, Bitgaram's face when it opened, surprised, annoyed, half-naked, and behind him, in the shadows of the room, Lyra. The hall erupted, not loudly, but the murmurs were immediate, shocked, angry. Bitgaram's hands clenched on the arms of his chair. This proves nothing, he said. His voice was calm, but there was tension underneath it now. I requested my son that day. I have the right to see my own child. What happened after was an accident, a tragedy, but not a crime. And the servant? The Drago Lord asked. Marin, the woman you executed within hours, without trial, without testimony. She was negligent. She didn't have the child. She should have. She handed him to you, on your order, and when he died, you killed her to silence the one person who could say where he actually was. Bitgaram's jaw tightened. The Drago Lord gestured again. Silas, step forward. The pack physician stepped into the hall. He looked older than Victoria remembered, smaller, like the weight of what he was about to say had already broken something inside him. You treated the Luna for 3 years, the Drago Lord said, for a sickness you could never cure. Tell them why. Silas's voice was barely above a whisper. The bond, the mate bond. When one half is unfaithful, the bond reacts. It tries to protect the wronged mate. It sends signals. Sickness. Pain. Exhaustion. I knew what it was from the first visit. And you said nothing. The Alpha ordered me not to. The hall went silent again. You let her suffer. The Drago Lord said quietly. For 3 years, you watched her body break down. You watched her nearly die giving birth, and you said nothing. I'm sorry. Silas's voice cracked. I'm so sorry. Your apology means nothing. The Drago Lord turned back to the hall. The affair was not brief. It was not a mistake. It began before the marriage. It continued throughout. And everyone in this pack knew. Everyone except the one person who had the right to know. He paused. And now, the final witness. The doors to the hall opened. Victoria walked in. The reaction was immediate. Gasps, whispers, shock. She looked different. They all saw it. Not broken, not grieving, not the hollow, fading woman who had left months ago. Strong, clear, alive. She walked to the center of the hall, stood beside the Drago Lord, and looked at Bitgarum. "My son died because of your negligence," she said. Her voice was calm, steady, not loud, but it carried. "You were with her, with Lyra, in your study, and you weren't paying attention, and my son, our son, wandered out, and he died." Bitgarum said nothing. "You blamed me," Victoria continued. "You looked at me every day for 2 months and told me it was my fault. You isolated me. You gaslit me. You made me believe I was the reason our child was dead, while you knew, the entire time. You knew." She took a step forward. "You killed an innocent woman to hide it. You betrayed the bond we shared for 5 years. You lied to the pack. You lied to the elders. You stood here in this hall and pretended to grieve while planning to replace me." Her eyes moved to Lyra. "With her, my best friend, the woman I trusted more than anyone, the woman who held my son, who comforted me, who sat beside me while I fell apart, and the entire time, she was fucking my husband." Lyra's face went white. "You both deserve everything that's about to happen to you." The elders stood. The eldest, a woman named Kara, white-haired, ancient, with eyes that had seen more alphas rise and fall than anyone could count, stepped forward. "The evidence is clear," she said. "The bond was betrayed. The child's death was covered up. An innocent was executed. The sacred laws that govern this pack, that govern all packs, have been broken." She turned to Bitgarum. "An alpha who breaks sacred law cannot lead. The title is revoked." The words fell like stones. Bitgarum stood. His hands were shaking now, not from fear, from rage. "You can't." "We can," Kara said. "And we have." She looked at the other alphas in the room. One by one, they nodded. It was done. Bitgarum was stripped of his title that same hour. Not gently, not quietly. Publicly. In front of every witness, the alpha's mark on his chest, the symbol burned into his skin when he took the throne, was removed. Not physically, magically. The elders performed the ritual, and the mark faded, and with it, the authority it carried. Bitgarum was no longer alpha. He was just a wolf. Lyra stood beside him, silent, pale. The bond between them was tested, brought before the elders, examined, weighed. It wasn't fated. It was nothing. Just lust, just choice, just two people who had decided selfishly that they wanted each other more than they cared about the people they were hurting. The pack rejected her, formally, completely. She had no bond, no claim, no power. She was nothing. Bitgarum and Lyra were exiled, banished from Thornwood, forbidden from ever returning. They left that same night, escorted to the border by guards, stripped of title, of authority, of everything they had built. Victoria watched them go. She felt nothing. Not satisfaction, not relief, not even anger, just emptiness. Justice had been served. The truth had been spoken. Bitgarum had lost everything. But Alec was still dead, and no amount of revenge could change that. The Dragolord found her standing at the edge of the hall after it was over. "It's done," he said quietly. Victoria nodded. "Are you all right?" She looked at him, this man, this being who had stood beside her, who had helped her, who had given her the tools to fight back when she had nothing left. "I don't know," she said honestly. The Drago Lord was quiet for a moment. Then, "You don't have to know yet." Victoria smiled. It was small, tired, but real. Thank you, she said, for everything. The Drago Lord looked at her, and something passed between them, something unspoken, something heavy, something that neither of them was ready to name. You're welcome, he said. And they stood there, side by side in the quiet aftermath of everything, and neither of them moved, because moving meant deciding what came next, and neither of them knew. They left at dawn. Victoria and the Drago Lord. They walked out of the pack house, together, through the gates, into the forest that stretched toward the northern ridge. Behind them, Thornwood was waking, rebuilding, choosing a new alpha, moving forward without Bitgarum. Victoria didn't look back. She had gotten what she came for: justice, truth, reckoning. But as she walked beside the Drago Lord, as the sun rose over the trees and the world turned gold, she realized something. She didn't want to go back to her father's den. She didn't want to rebuild the life she had before. She wanted something new, something that was hers. And she wanted it with the Drago Lord. What happens now? She asked quietly. The Drago Lord looked at her. His golden eyes were warm in the morning light. Whatever you want. Victoria smiled. For the first time in a very long time, the future felt open, and she was ready for it. The end.